How much Bitcoin is enough? I asked 3 of the top AIs to tell me just that. I said, I want freedom, independence, and to worry less about money in 10 years. With this in mind, I want to be able to spend $150,000 a year from just BTC. Keep in mind sequence of return risk, which we'll talk about. Give me how much Bitcoin I need. I asked Grok, ChatGPT, and Gemini. I want to go through this. I'll also show you how much maybe you can withdraw of your overall Bitcoin portfolio based on historical results. Of course, this is not bulletproof, right? I can't see the future, but this should be interesting. If you don't mind, hit subscribe underneath the video. If you do want to trade Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, you can check out the link underneath the video to BYDeFi. We continue to set higher highs and higher lows right now. We look like we bounced off the prior resistance, which was right at $112,000. If you want some free money right now, we are running a campaign on BYDeFi. Trade and earn up to $10,000 of XRP. You don't have to trade XRP either. You can just trade whatever asset you want on the platform. And we are gearing up for another one of these where we're going to give back USDT. So just straight cash for the people that trade. So check this out underneath the video. You can get signed up in just a few minutes and you don't have to KYC. Now, I want to ask how much Bitcoin I need, right? Of course, everyone's situation is different. I do a lot of videos going through you need 2 Bitcoin, you need 1 Bitcoin, depending on how much you want to withdraw, how high you think Bitcoin's going to go. But instead, I just asked the AI today, right? And I gave it some specifications. Obviously, everyone's situation is different. Everyone wants a different amount to spend over a different time span, and everyone's situations are a bit different, but I just thought I'd see what it said, right? How much Bitcoin is, quote, enough? I want freedom, independence, and to worry less about money in 10 years. With this in mind, I want to be able to spend $150,000 a year from just Bitcoin. Of course, it's going to be different for everyone, but let's say $150,000. Keep in mind sequence of return risk. So what I'm saying here is if you start withdrawing from a portfolio right when we go into a bear market, your portfolio is going to do much worse than if we're right at the beginning of a bull market. There's a sequence of return risk. So the sequence of returns that you get right after you start pulling from your portfolio matters a lot. Now, keep in mind, typically we have a safe withdrawal rate of 4%. We'll talk more about that later, but it said to achieve financial freedom, independence, and the ability to spend $150 annually in today's dollars from Bitcoin in 10 years while accounting for sequence of return risk. We will estimate how much Bitcoin is required. So let's see. Assuming 2 to 3% annual inflation rate, this is Grok, by the way, compounding effect over 10 years is 22 to 35%, thus $150,000 in 2025 dollars equals approximately, let's call it $200,000 in 2035. It says to use a safe withdrawal rate of 4%, right? So we could use a lower withdrawal rate of maybe 3%. It says you should hold a cash buffer, or you can hold a cash buffer, or plan for a higher Bitcoin allocation to account for potential early losses. So let's go through the scenarios. Conservatively, it says 5% annual growth, similar to the stock market. 83,000 times 1.05 to the 10th equals $135,000 Bitcoin. So it's saying that Bitcoin's at $83,000. Interesting. Come on. That's not the case. It's funny how these AIs have a pretty hard time pulling price data, or maybe they're just lazy. We're at 115,000. So multiply that out. It might be closer to, just doing the math off the top of my head, like $160,000 Bitcoin based on this 5% annual growth rate, which is kind of crazy. That's a conservative, they're calling it. Moderate, which I'd say is probably more likely. 25% annual growth. It's done much more than that, even over the last 10 years. It says it was about that between 2013 and 2023. That's not the case either. Come on, Elon. But 773,000 per Bitcoin. Keep in mind, that's about 2/3 of what gold's market cap is now. So that might put it at like half of gold's market cap by then. And then optimistic is 3.5 million. So Bitcoin needed for a $6 million portfolio. In this conservative example, says 44.4 Bitcoin. In the moderate, it says 7.8. And then the optimistic is 1.7. Okay, so that is what Grok says. Now, what about ChatGPT? Target portfolio value in 10 years. And I'll give you my thoughts on this at the end too. It says, you could do this 4% safe withdrawal rate or 3% yield. So similar to what we heard in the last one. It says conservative is 250K. So a little bit higher on the conservative end. The base case is 500,000, which is a little bit more conservative than the last one at 770,000. And then the bullish is 1 million. So also more conservative. Bitcoin you'll need based on 4% drawdown, 15 in the $250,000 example, 500,000 in the 7.5 Bitcoin based on 500K, or 3.75 based on $1 million Bitcoin. Okay, this is ChatGPT. Then Gemini, let's see what it says. It uses the 4% safe withdrawal rate too. So this is one of the major assumptions. This and the price are really what you're assuming here. Okay, it says future price of Bitcoin. Let's use a moderate hypothetical price of $250,000 per Bitcoin in 10 years. Withdrawal rate, 3% or 4%. It says 3% is used for higher risk, more volatile assets like crypto. We'll assume a moderate long-term inflation of 3%. It says basically we'll need a required portfolio value of $5 million at $150,000 per year. So we need 20 Bitcoin. Now that's pretty crazy because a $5 million portfolio spending $150,000 a year, that's less than that's like a 3% safe withdrawal rate. Yeah, it's a 3% safe withdrawal rate. So that is like even less than the stock market. Even though Bitcoin performs better, I think it's assuming extra volatility and assuming that you want to be very careful and conservative. Okay, so let's talk about what these AIs said. Basically, a lot of them were very conservative on the low end, saying that Bitcoin would only reach maybe 150 or 250,000. I get that's laying out the possible scenarios. I don't think that's very likely. I mean, $230,000 Bitcoin is only a 2x over the next 10 years. We've seen that in the last year alone. Of course, we've been in a bull market, but if you assume that Bitcoin's going to be around in 10 years, I think you're probably assuming it's going to be at least maybe 400,000, something like a 3.5 to 4x in 10 years. Of course, I could be wrong, but I'm also bullish on Bitcoin, and that's a really good return, but it's also not crazy for Bitcoin by any means. This is less than what we've seen in the past. So let's say $400,000 Bitcoin. And then we come down to the Monte Carlo simulation, right? What withdrawal rate are we going to use? A lot of people use Monte Carlo simulation. So basically look at the past to determine what kind of safe withdrawal rate we can take in the future. So depending on the volatility, because that affects sequence of return risk, and then the rate of return, we can figure out, how often we would have been able to withdraw 4% and had it be successful, or when we would have run out of money. I found this website, Monte Carlo Simulation Portfolio Visualizer, and you can use different asset classes, but they don't have Bitcoin. They have a lot of different assets, from like high yield corporate bonds to REITs to golds to precious metals, US stock market. They really need to add Bitcoin here. But I figure it somewhat trades with the large cap growth. It performs better than that, but let's just say that, we have $1 million portfolio and we want to withdraw 50,000 a year for 30 years, and we're just in large cap growth stocks. This would allow us to actually pull more than 4%. So in 50% of scenarios, the safe withdrawal rate was 7.6%. If you want to be more successful, so in 3 out of every 4, if you want to still have money at the end, you have a 5.08% safe withdrawal rate. So just with large caps alone, you probably can pull 7.6%. I'm not sure you want to get that aggressive though, because some scenarios you'll run out of money. So let's say you want to get a little bit more aggressive. and do a 5% safe withdrawal rate, you're probably going to be fine. And in most scenarios, you're going to actually have a much bigger portfolio at the end than when you start. And this is just based on large cap growth. With Bitcoin, it's so volatile, and we have such big drawdowns. It definitely will affect how much you can pull from it. Of course, in most scenarios, you probably don't want to just have Bitcoin. You probably want to have other assets, right? I know some people just have Bitcoin because it outperforms everything, but you probably want other assets for your own like sanity. You want to be able to pull from cash if you don't want to sell your Bitcoin because we go into a bear market, or you want maybe a rental property because you can buy it at a good price, or you just have some retirement funds that are just in the S&P 500, right? That will give you more options when you do have to sell. So you don't just have to sell Bitcoin, especially if it's down like 40, 50% and the rest of the market's down 20%. But in my mind, right, if you want to retire on $150,000 a year, in the traditional stock market, you need $3.75 million, right? And recently, the creator of the 4% rule actually said that's not right. It was 4.1%. They rounded it down, so that it was catchier. And now he thinks it's more like 5%. And if you're willing to be a little bit more dynamic, it could be even higher. Like if we go into a bear market, then don't spend as much or have a cash buffer or something like that. So in that scenario, you need about $3 million in stocks. If you believe Bitcoin's going to $400,000 or $500,000, let's say for the math to be easy, I would still have some diversification in the stock market or a rental or something like that, just to give you that ability so you don't have to sell Bitcoin. But based on needing $3 million, you would need about 6 Bitcoin. Now, not everyone can get there. That's fine. Like, that's just math. At the end of the day, not everyone's going to be able to retire just on Bitcoin in a certain time span. This is just based on $500,000 Bitcoin and a certain safe withdrawal rate. Now, if you want to withdraw more than that, if you're saying, well, I could take loans against it and that could improve my tax efficiency, and then maybe I take out 7% a year and then it continues to grow at 30%, of course, you're going to be able to change the scenario around. So maybe you only need 1 Bitcoin or half a Bitcoin. Some people will say you only need 0.1 Bitcoin to retire. And one day that might be true, but we're not close to that point now, right? And again, so much of it is just dependent on how the market reacts and moves in the future. But yeah, I guess in some scenario, if Bitcoin continues to go up at 40% a year, you could spend 25% of it, right? So yeah, maybe you just start today with accumulating some, knowing that we won't know the exact amount that we'll need to retire on. Maybe you just start with whatever you're comfortable with. I think that's probably the best plan. Start with, if you make $5,000 a month and you have $1,000 left to invest at the end of the month, maybe put in $300, right? $400, whatever you're comfortable with, that gives you some diversification still. So that way you continue to stack instead of getting freaked out when we go into a bear market, and then just continue that forever. Like continue as we go up to $200,000 Bitcoin, $300,000 Bitcoin, back down to $200,000 Bitcoin. Keep on stacking. You'll probably do really well in the end. And of course, if you do want to go more risk on, you can trade crypto over on BYDeFi. There's a link to this underneath the video. You can get set up in just a few minutes. It's not right for everyone, but if you want to get really good returns, you can use leverage. And of course, you have to know what you're doing. I do have a full video coming out either right before this video or right after it. But let me know your thoughts on Grok, ChatGPT, and Gemini. Was one better than the other? What would you suggest to someone that's wondering how much Bitcoin is enough? I get that question a lot. At the end of the day, it's going to be dependent on your situation. It's going to be dependent on your income, dependent on your risk tolerance, and what you want at the end of the day. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I'll see y'all soon. Bye.